Well, hi, everybody. Welcome today. Welcome to MapTech's webinar series held every other Wednesday. For those of you who are new, my name is Ben Williamson, and I'm the project manager here at the Mountains and Plains Thriving Communities Collaborative, otherwise known as MapTech. We are the EPA Region 8 Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center, known as TICTACs, serving Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming, as well as all 28 federally recognized tribal nations within our region. Our goal is to empower communities to build capacity for environmental and energy projects throughout the region. Our central service is that we provide free technical assistance, and this is available to tribes, local governments, nonprofits, and community groups. We can help you navigate federal grant systems, find the right funding, develop strong proposals, plan your project, work with you post-award, answer questions, and connect with other groups doing similar work. But our first and foremost priority is to listen and meet communities where they're at. For today, we're really excited to host the Mountains and Plains Environmental Justice Grants Hub, or otherwise known as MAP EJ Grants Hub. They will be presenting on a very relevant and current grant opportunity that is live right now. That's called the Thriving Communities Grant. So I encourage all attendees to consider applying for this and learning more about it through this webinar, but also through the website that will be shared. This grant is designed to provide communities with funding to assess, plan, and implement environmental infrastructure, health, and energy projects, as well as more. And these awards are funded up to $350,000 with a non-competitive award at $75,000. So we'll go into the details. And exactly, Craig, great question. I'll have everyone pop questions into the chat. That's fantastic. And then we'll answer those in the Q&A at the end. So please populate the chat with questions as we go. I also wanted to note that this is being recorded today and it'll be on MapTech's YouTube page. So if others in your organization would like to watch this, it'll be available. But in terms of I'll start with introductions from MAP EJ Grants. Today we are joined by Leslie Fajardo-Foe, Molly Rafferty, and Megan Guevara from the hub. Leslie is the grants manager for North Dakota, is coming from a background of governmental, nonprofit, and academic, and is supporting the development of strategy, grant making, and grant review process. Molly is the grants manager for South Dakota and has experience providing technical assistance, evaluation, and strategic planning to tribes, health centers, community-based organizations, and local and state governments on various public health projects. And lastly, Megan Guevara is the grants manager for Montana and has a background in training and technical assistance at the federal and state and local level in support of collaborative public sector system reforms. So they all have really relevant backgrounds for this grant. And so we thank Leslie, Molly, and Megan for joining us today. So again, please populate your questions into the chat, and then we'll do an interactive Q&A session at the end. So with that, I will hand it over to the team at MAP EJ Grants, and you guys can share your screen and start your presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ben, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Fajardo-Foe. I'm one of the senior grant managers for the MAP EJ Grant Hub project, and it's a pleasure today to be with all of you. So we have also our grant-making director, Meredith Lee, as well in the conversation. I would just start with, this is one of the great opportunities in terms of like how this Thriving Community Initiative is a program that has different perspective of how we can utilize funding to support communities in order to address inequities existing related to environmental impact. So for today, we're going to be talking about, if we can move to the next slide. There we go. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to have an introduction about more who we are and what we're doing in terms of the project. We'll go over the grant overview, and you will learn more about the tiers, eligibility, timeline, and some questions that we are trying to answer those in advance for all of you, as well as the application overview, where you learn more about how these two types of applications that we will have this time for competitive and non-competitive. Next slide, please. There you go. So the purpose of this grant making program is to reduce barriers and make it easier for small community-based organizations. We, as grant makers, JSI is very focused on overcome any constraints that can exist during the application process and the relationship that, and also learning to experience around federal grants. So we are really focused on bringing the best opportunities in terms of technical assistance and answering any questions and supporting you in the process of applying for this funding opportunity. This comes from $600 million, comes from the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's one of the largest investments in climate action in history. And we are not the only ones doing this work. So JSI is one of the 11 grant makers that are covering all the EPA regions. And we will be distributing thousands of grants over the next 3 years. Next slide, please. So who we are? So we are JSI is a nonprofit organization that works nationally and internationally since 1984. Our focus is public health, economic opportunity, as well as education. So we have been doing this work for a long time, and we know that this work cannot be done by ourselves. So we also have community-based partner organizations who are supporting this process. And as you can see in the slide, those are all our Environmental Justice Council members who are also going to be key partners for the whole process of this program. Next, please. So here's our incredible team, talent professionals who have been working since day one to provide the best opportunities for organizations to apply for this work. So as we mentioned, we have grant managers for each of the states. So we are 6 different grant managers that we're going to be working. We are already working very specific from the community engagement piece, outreach, and also holding different office hours and meetings where we can answer questions around the work that we are doing here. So the next slide, please. So the purpose of this program is to allocate $40 million in grants over 3 years. So we are going to be focusing our work in Region 8. That include Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, Wyoming, and 28 tribes working on environmental justice efforts. As I mentioned earlier, this is the goals are to get money and resources to the environmental justice communities, to reduce the burden on getting and managing federal grants. And you will hear more about this when we go over the grant overview and as well as the application. And for sure, we want to provide and strengthen the capacity of local organizations that support long-term sustainability in the area. So all our efforts are not only for organizations to know about this funding opportunity, but also to learn more and understand the dynamics that exist in each of the states that we also as a grant maker continue providing the best service that we can to achieve the goals that those organizations have during the grant process. So I will go and pass this to Molly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leslie. So I'm just going to give an overview of the grants and go ahead to next slide. So we're offering 3 tiers of grants. So we have the Tier 1 grants, which are all about assessment and research. Those grants will be up to $150,000 and projects will last for a year. And so examples of those projects include sampling, testing, monitoring, surveys and studies, and public education. We're also offering the Tier 2 grants, which are all about planning. So if you have a project in mind, but you haven't fully planned it yet, you would apply to a Tier 2 grant. And so that's really the planning phase. That includes things like partnership building, public outreach and education, coordinating with community stakeholders, training activities for community organizations and community members, and smaller land purchases and acquisitions, and those would require less than half of the total amount of the subgrant funding. And so the Tier 2 grants would be up to $250,000, and those would range from 1 to 2 years. And then Tier 3 grants are all about development. So you have the project planned, you're ready to implement it. So that could include things like blueprints for construction or cleanup projects, getting permits in place, smaller land purchases and acquisitions again, and public outreach and education. And then we're also piloting 10 $75,000 non-competitive fixed amount awards. Those are for severely capacity constrained organizations. And those are only Tier 1 projects. And so when we think of severely capacity constrained organizations, that might be an organization who just received their 501c3 status, or maybe they don't have any paid staff, they're mostly volunteers, or maybe they've never received a grant before, things like that. And so that is an option that we'll talk a little bit more about later. All right, next slide. There's a really wide range of project topic areas that you can consider. So I'm going to share some from this list that we've compiled, but it's definitely not exhaustive. So project topics could include air quality and asthma, water quality and sampling, small cleanup projects, improving food access, healthy homes projects, emergency preparedness and disaster resiliency, environmental job training or environmental justice training for youth. And there's, again, many other topics that could qualify. It just has to be a community-driven project and have an environmental justice focus. Next slide. So who is eligible for our grants is nonprofit organizations, tribal governments and intertribal consortia, local governments, institutions of higher education, and Native American organizations. And next slide. So this slide talks about benefiting a community of focus. Grants have to benefit a community of focus as identified by the Inflation Reduction Act Disadvantaged Communities Map. And so the website listed on this slide is a tool that you can use as a part of your application. So you can check to see if the community that you're proposing to work with is designated as disadvantaged by this tool. The tool is not comprehensive, so even if your community isn't reflected in this map, you might still be eligible, and so we could talk about that if that's the case. Disadvantaged communities are defined by EPA as a population or geographic location in the US that experiences disproportionate environmental and climatic harms and risks. This disproportionality can be a result of greater vulnerability to environmental hazards, lack of opportunity for public participation, or other factors. Increased vulnerability may be attributed to an accumulation of negative or lack of positive environmental health, economic or social conditions. Yeah, so that's just a useful tool, but again, it doesn't necessarily represent, everything about the community that you may be working with. And next slide. So a few more things to know. We anticipate 3 cycles of grant applications. applicants can apply to multiple cycles, and a single applicant can receive up to 2 awards for a total of up to $600,000. So that means you could get a Tier 1 application during Cycle 1, and then apply and receive a Tier 2 application in Cycle 3, or you could, get a Tier 2 in Cycle 2 and a Tier 3 in Cycle 3, as long as the total award amount is not over $600,000. You should be all set. And you can also even receive a non-competitive award in Cycle 1 or 2, and then come back for a competitive award in a later cycle. And yeah, this slide just has our timeline. So Cycle 1 is open right now. The deadline for that is December 12th. Cycle 2 will be doing in spring 2025, and Cycle 3 will be in fall 2025. And so the project is for 3 years total, but the allocation is only 2 years. And so as you plan your project, we wanted to raise a few specific considerations. So as a note, the aim of our project is to really support grantees to make the process of navigating federal funds less burdensome, but it's still federal funding. There are still a lot of requirements. So a few notes on this slide. If you're planning to propose a land purchase as part of a Tier 2 or Tier 3 proposal, it cannot exceed 50% of your overall project budget. If you're in a fiscally sponsored entity, there's more information about this in our FAQ documents, special guidelines related to application restrictions, allowable expenses, and contracting, and we're happy to talk more about that. If you are selected to receive a subgrant, certain types of projects are subject to additional EPA requirements. So we do recommend reviewing those requirements before you submit your proposal, just so you're aware of those steps that you might need to take, and you can budget for those steps as needed. So any projects that include human subjects research must have the approval of an IRB, and the research plan must also be directly approved by EPA. Projects that include construction, renovation, remodeling, things like that are subject to federal requirements regarding the procurement of materials and fair labor practices. And then projects that include the collection of environmental data must have a quality assurance project plan. And so again, that needs to follow a specific format and must also be approved by EPA. And so if you think your project would hit on any of these components, again, check our FAQ, and you can also reach out to us for more details. We just wanted to touch on them briefly here. And then next slide. And so this slide, again, just dives a little bit more into that quality assurance project plan. So again, if your project is planning to collect, produce, or use environmental data, such as for air, water, or soil samples, you have to develop this plan, which we call a QAP. So it's a detailed plan. It outlines how the data will be gathered, analyzed, and assessed to meet quality standards, and it must be approved by the EPA before project initiation. So the development of the QAPs may require a significant investment of time and labor on the part of grantees. In your application, you could include resources that are necessary to support the development of the QAP. You could put that in your project budget or work plan if you submit one. We're also working with the EPA and the other grant makers to compile QAP resources and sort of figure out what support we can offer grantees as you develop your QAPs. And soon there will be like a decision tree resource coming out that can help you decide if your project is going to need a QAP. So yeah, just note that creating a QAP can be time consuming and additional technical assistance might be necessary within your budget. Regular reviews and updates to the QAP will also be required. And those would need to be written and submitted by March or April of 2025. Next slide.
Holy shit.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Megan here to do an overview of the application.
Thank you so much, Molly. Hello, everyone. I'm Megan Guevara, and I am the grants manager for Montana. And I'm going to be diving into a little bit more detail about both the competitive and non-competitive applications and how they're going to be evaluated. So as we've mentioned, there are two types of applications that are available. The non-competitive is intended for severely capacity constrained organizations, and the competitive is intended for all other applicants. We intended both of the applications to be straightforward and relatively brief. So there's no need to engage with grants.gov or other federal grant portals for this opportunity. You apply directly to us at the MAP EJ Grants Hub. And we also did not intend for these applications to require a professional grant writer, though we are very glad that the MAP Tech resources are available to support you. And both of the applications are available in English and Spanish through an online portal. And there's also PDF versions available in English and Spanish as well. So if you'd like to preview the questions before you actually go into the portal, the PDFs are available for that. And also, if you would like to submit your application by mail, you can use the PDF version to submit your responses that way as well. Applications through the online portal have to be submitted by 11:59 p.m. Mountain Time on December 12th, and applications submitted by mail need to be postmarked by December 12th in order to be eligible for this cycle of funding. There are instructions included with the application, and there's also a more detailed applicant guide available on our website that walks through the questions step by step if you'd like a little bit more instruction. The first section of both applications gets into eligibility requirements. So you'll be asked to answer questions about the type of organization you are, where your program will be taking place, and to what extent you're serving communities of focus. We can go to the next slide. And here we'll get into a little bit more detail about the competitive application and how it's going to be evaluated. So the application includes 6 narrative sections and then also a budget and a budget narrative. And there's a word limit on each of the narrative sections that we hope is enough space for you to tell your story, but not onerous in terms of the length. And you'll see here the sections include the applicant profile, which will be space for you to talk about your experience with environmental justice and the work that your organization does. Need and centering community, which will get into the need for this project, how it addresses an environmental justice issue in your community, and how the community of focus will benefit from this project. The third section is around partnerships, assets, and meaningful community engagement. There is not a partnership requirement for this funding program, but you are welcome to include partners in your proposal and to talk about the assets of your community that you will be using for this work and how you will be engaging that community of focus in this work as well. Project goals, activities, and milestones ask you to speak to the work that you're going to be doing and how it's going to help you achieve the goals of the project. We do not require a formal work plan at this point. That will come after award for folks who are selected, but we anticipate this as an outline of the steps that you'll be taking and what you hope to achieve. Performance measures and sustainability will ask you about how you will measure progress throughout your project and how you see this work being sustained beyond the grant period. Programmatic capability asks you about your organizational capacity and experience, as well as the capacity and experience of the folks who are working on the project. And we welcome both professional experience as well as lived experience in talking about capacity. And then for the budget and the budget narrative, for the budget, we provide an Excel template for you to fill out to include your costs. And then the budget narrative is an attachment that you will upload where you have the opportunity to describe how each of those costs links back to the programmatic process that you've described. And you can see here on the slide that each of these sections is weighted. So each section will be scored by our evaluators on a scale of 1 to 5. And then those scores will be multiplied by their weighting to get to your final score. So if you score a 4 on the applicant profile, that's only multiplied by 1, and your score would be 1. Versus if you score a 4 on performance measures and sustainability, that gets multiplied by 3, and so your score there would be 12. So this can give you a sense of what are the priority areas for us in terms of your application. And we can go to the next slide. And each of the applications is going to be reviewed by members of our Environmental Justice Council, which is comprised of community-based organizations from across Region 8. So they will complete the scoring and they will also provide feedback on the applications. And this gives you a high-level sense of what that 1 through 5 scoring rubric looks like. So generally speaking, applications that are scoring 1s and 2s are either not responsive to the application question, or they don't align with the key goals of this grant-making program, which are that an environmental justice issue is being addressed. It's being addressed in a way that benefits a community of focus, one of the IRA disadvantaged communities that was mentioned earlier. and the applicant demonstrates the capacity to complete the project or doesn't demonstrate the capacity to complete the project as described. So those would be the scores that would be less likely to be recommended for funding. Applications that score an average of 3 will have a proposed project that is intended to address an environmental justice issue in a community of focus, but there's concerns about gaps in the project design or issues with the approach that was described where we can't really see how the activities are connected to the intended goals of the project. So these applications may be funded, but if they are, then there may be some negotiation around the scope of work or some technical assistance provided in finalizing the contract for that work. And then the applications that score 4s or 5s are those that present an attainable project that does align with those environmental justice goals, do benefit communities of interest, and also demonstrate a plan to effectively engage those communities in the design or the implementation of the project, as well as having the capacity to achieve the project goals. And what brings an application up to a 5 is also demonstrating how this work fits into a broader community strategy for environmental justice or environmental health. And this scoring rubric is available in the slide deck, which we've shared in the chat box, and is also available on the website for anybody that wants to take a closer look. We do not know how competitive this program is going to be since this is the first time this funding is being offered. So we don't have a sense of exactly where the cutoff is going to be in terms of funding and scoring. But the 2 factors we'll be taking into consideration are both the score that an application receives, as well as geographic diversity, because we do want to make sure that these resources are reaching tribal nations as well as all of the states in Region 8. And we can move on to the next slide. So our non-competitive application is set up a little bit differently. So it's not scored because it is not a competitive process between applicants. But the application includes a narrative section to describe your organization and the project that you are looking to achieve. And then it includes an organizational capacity assessment, which will ask questions about the governance of your organization and leadership, your financial structures and policy, your strategic plan, your staffing, your work with the community, to give us a better understanding of what the current capacity is of your organization and where you could benefit from some support. And that will be followed up by a semi-structured interview, a conversation with a member of our team to learn more about the responses that you gave. We may also ask for some follow-up in terms of documentation around your policies, and decisions on the non-competitive applications will be made based on the need of the organization for capacity building technical assistance, as well as whether the project that is proposed is aligned with the goals of the Thriving Communities Grantmaker program. And we can move on to the next slide. So that is a little bit about both our competitive and non-competitive applications. And again, feel free to preview both of them on our website and to reach out to either the team at MapTech or our team if you have any questions about the application, about eligibility, or about how your application will be evaluated. And that website is mapejgrants.org. And we also wanted to share that the Environmental Protection Network has a lot of resources available on their website, including office hours every other week on assistance with attaining a UEI. And that unique entity identifier is required for anyone who's going to be receiving federal funding. You do not need it to apply, but in anticipation of potentially receiving funds, we encourage everyone to sign up for a UEI, and MapTech can provide that support, or EPN if you don't currently have a UEI. And then usually we have a slide about MapTech, but we all know how awesome MapTech is already. And the distinction that we do want to mention about the difference between the resources available through MapTech and what we're able to provide at the Map EJ Grants Hub is that because we are the grant maker and will be involved in evaluating the applications, we can't provide feedback on the project that you're planning to propose or the strength of your application. We can only answer technical questions about the application itself or answer questions about eligibility for the program. whereas the team at MapTech can provide more robust feedback and can provide support on the development of the application. So if you're wondering about the technical components of the program, please feel free to reach out to us. And if you would like support on the development of your application and being able to move forward, then we encourage you to reach out to the team at MapTech. And now I believe we can open it up for questions.
Thank you, Megan and Leslie and Molly. That was great. Thank you so much for explaining the grant. And we're now going to open it up for Q&A. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and I will call on you and you can ask your question. I also see there was a lot of questions in the Q&A as we were going, and a lot of them were answered via the chat, but I also wonder it might be helpful to ask a few of those out loud to make sure that everyone saw those. So I'll start with some questions from the chat, but also feel free to raise your hand and we will get to your questions. So a first question, I think it's important to just maybe say again, is this funding limited to communities of focus as identified as a disadvantaged by the climate and economic justice screening tool?
Sure. So our mandate is to try to get as many of these resources into communities of focus as possible. So your application will benefit from having a community of focus identified. And in terms of our scoring rubric, the scoring rubric is designed to focus on those disadvantaged communities. That being said, it is not a requirement that a certain percentage of your community is a community of focus, and there is the opportunity in the narrative to describe who is benefiting from the program and how communities of focus or communities that are not disadvantaged communities are going to be benefiting as well.
Awesome. I see Madeline has her hand up, so I'll hand it over to Madeline for a question.
Hi, thank you. I am just reaching out in regards to the UEI for the capacity constrained non-competitive grants. This Soil and Water Conservation District in Conejos County is trying to get up and reestablished, and they do not have an active UEI. Would it be all right if they were to apply through like the Colorado State Conservation Board or the their nonprofit entity, just trying to figure out how we can still get funds to a capacity constrained organization if they're in the formation process?
Sure. So every application needs to have a lead entity that is an eligible entity. So as long as there's somebody taking the lead on the application who will be the signatory on the contract, who's able to receive funds, that's totally fine. So this applies to partnerships as well. If you have a couple of groups that are working together, or if you have a coalition that's not a legal entity that's looking to get funds, being able to select one partner who's willing to be the lead on the application and be the signatory on the contract will work for us. And it is important to consider that if you are thinking about that capacity constrained, the non-competitive application for capacity constrained organizations, whoever is the lead applicant will be the organization that's assessed for their capacity constraint. So if you pick another lead organization that may not be capacity constrained, then that organization wouldn't be eligible to apply for the non-competitive grant, but they could still apply for the competitive grant. And in terms of the UEI, I did want to add to that process does usually take a few weeks, but you don't have to have a UEI in place until the awards are signed, which we anticipate will be in the spring. So if an organization is planning to get a UEI and just doesn't have one yet, they can still apply, and the UEI wouldn't need to be in place until we actually execute the contract.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks. There were a few questions just around future cycles of funding. And the one question was is there any certainty on the second and third cycles? Meaning, is there a potential at this point for funding to be affected or pulled before those cycles are completed? And as Meredith mentioned in the chat, all of the $40 million for this project should be allocated from the federal government to JSI before the end of this calendar year. So they're moving forward with all three cycles as planned. Do you all want to say anything more about that point?
That is our plan at this point. We are moving ahead as planned, and if anything changes, we'll make sure to notify all potential applicants.
Great. Another question had to do with indirect costs, and the question was, is there a negotiated facilities and administrative cost or indirect costs for educational institutions or other restrictions with these indirect costs?
Yes, so indirect costs can be included in your budget if the lead applicant has a NICRA, a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement with the federal government already, then they can use that rate in their proposal. And if you do not have a NICRA, then you can use the de minimis rate, which is 15% of your modified direct costs. And that has been increased effective October 1st. It used to be 10% and now it's 15%. One thing to consider is there's something called that the modified direct cost amount that you calculate your indirect on, which is impacted by having subrecipient agreements. So if you do have subrecipients or partners that you're including in your budget, you may not be able to include that full 15% indirect. And if you need any support around where to go for the formulas to calculate that, let us know and we can help out with that. But yes, indirect is definitely an allowable cost for the program.
Awesome. I see a really good question here around, is there any preference for statewide versus local if a statewide application is entirely working within an EJ area?
There is no preference. We have been getting questions about both statewide and local programs. The three questions we've been encouraging folks to ask themselves and to speak to in their application are, is this an identified environmental justice issue? Can you demonstrate how it benefits a community of focus? And can you talk about how that community is going to be meaningfully engaged in the development or the execution of the project? So if you are able to do that with either a statewide program or a local program, that's what we'll be looking for in the application. And Leslie and Meredith and Molly, please feel free to jump in as well on any of these. And one other thing I will mention, because we just got this question yesterday, is that part of the application is actually drawing on a map what is your community of focus. And there is the ability to draw multiple shapes on those maps. So for example, if you are in a statewide program, but you're focusing on 4 urban regions for your program, you can draw those 4 regions on your map. Or if there are particular parts of the state that are going to be benefiting from the programming, there's the opportunity to be able to show us that rather than just drawing an area that covers the whole state. So that may allow you to more effectively communicate where you're seeing the impact of your project. And I also like to give folks the heads up that you will be asked about the communities that are benefiting from your project activities in your quarterly reports if you're funded as well. So if you have a statewide project or a project that's covering a large region, you'll also want to be thinking about, in terms of your performance measurement plan, how will you be able to tease out, who are the communities that are benefiting from those activities, and be able to talk to us about where in the state or where in the region those activities are resulting in benefit.
That's helpful. And Meredith put those 3 questions in the chat, so I encourage everyone to copy those and make sure they run through them. Any questions from the audience right now? Want to raise your hand?
I did just want to mention too, Ben, before we get more questions. So at the beginning, we talked about our team and how we do have a grants manager for each state. And also we have Savannah, who's our tribal grants manager. So if anyone on this call is interested in, meeting one-on-one with the grants manager for their state or Savannah, definitely reach out to us. There's all of our emails are listed on the website under the Meet the Team page. And I'll also send my email in the chat now. I'm the South Dakota grants manager, and I saw that, Susie, I think you're interested in applying. So just wanted to share, we do have these individual grants managers that are always willing to meet one-on-one and talk about this opportunity further.
Yeah, great point, Molly. I also, I guess I'll use this lull to just make sure everyone's clear on where to go for assistance. I think that's been a question we've had asked quite a bit. And as you saw on that slide, MapTech is designed to provide the technical assistance and the support for an application. So while we can't necessarily completely prepare an application for you, our staff here is fully ready to support the development of a proposal, answer your questions, help write or help develop your application, help develop budgets. We're very much here and ready to support. So we have staff members in all states ready to support you as well. So I will make sure MapTech's website, our email is in the chat, and I really encourage folks to reach out to us. But as Molly just mentioned, JSI, Map, EJ Grants Hub, they are also available to answer your technical questions around the application and the grant itself. So please reach out to your individual state's grants manager with those types of questions. If it's eligibility, if it's what can I do with this funding, if it's what tier am I eligible for, you can definitely reach out to those grants managers. I see there's a comment from Jill says that she thought it might take a long time, but it was actually quick and easy to get the UEI number for an established nonprofit. So for anybody that's wondering about getting a UEI number, Jill says that it's an easy process. So that's great. Thanks, Jill. There was a question about is a preliminary engineering report for a hydrogeological assessment considered a tier 1 or tier 2 project?
So I'll start out by saying that there is some squishiness between the tiers, and we understand that there'll be some interpretation in terms of what folks put their different projects in. The way we've been generally describing it is that for tier 1, if you're trying to better understand an issue or do research to get a sense of what your environmental justice issue is or how it impacts your community, that would be tier 1. So if you were doing a study because you were wanting to better understand, what is the impact on this particular community and is it necessary for us to engage in intervention, I would call it a tier 1. If it's a matter of, we know what the issue is, we are moving forward with planning and intervention in this community, and the study is a step that we have to take in order to be able to move the project forward, then I would call that a tier 2, because tier 2 is really about we know the problem, we know what issue we're trying to solve, and here we're laying the groundwork to be able to implement our intervention. And then tier 3 is the actual implementation of the intervention. So we would be happy to discuss the project in more detail if you need additional guidance on tiers, as Molly mentioned, through our office hours. But I would say those are the guidelines that we have been using, that, tier 1 is understanding, tier 2 is getting ready, and tier 3 is implementing.
So a few more questions here. From Noah, is there assistance available for gathering or compiling more detailed map data around EJ communities? I guess I'll let you guys talk, because I know you have a really nice EJ screen tutorial, but that's something also MapTech can certainly help develop, drawing out your area of focus and making sure that it fits within the IRA tool. But I'll let Megan speak to that as well.
I think that's what we would say. If you need guidance, if you're looking specifically about how to identify the area of focus for the grant program, that's definitely something either MapTech or our team can help with. And the video that's on our website describes that. If you're looking to better understand how to use EJ Screen more robustly, or how to interpret the information that you're getting from EJ Screen, or to understand where that's coming from, there are also a lot of great resources available through the EPA on their EJ Screen website. So they're beyond just understanding disadvantaged communities, that can give you information about some of the environmental justice indicators in the community that you're focusing on, climate risks related to climate change, and a lot of other data that you can spend hours and hours exploring EJ Screen. And if you want to better understand where that data is coming from and how reliable it is for your community, there is the opportunity to dig in more deeply through the EJ Screen website of what are the sources of data. Because we've also heard from some communities where what they're seeing on EJ Screen doesn't necessarily reflect their lived experience in their own communities. And so you can feel free to speak to that in your application as well. Or if you need some support, better understanding of where that data comes from. So for example, air quality indicators that may overall show that a community is not disproportionately impacted by particulates, but there have been some terrible fire seasons that have led people to be impacted by wildfires in their community. We would definitely love to hear about that experience in your application if you feel like it's not well aligned with what you're seeing in EJ Screen.
Yeah, that's very much relates to the question we also just received. I think you kind of answered it there, but the question is, to what extent will common economic challenges facing remote rural communities, for example, a low tax base or declining population or fixed income, support an applicant's argument within their application that is not identified as a community focus? I think you just answered that, but.
Yeah, and we recognize, that there are, while EJ Screen is wonderful that it gets down to the census tract level, there are also issues that impact very small individual communities, both in terms of socioeconomic factors as well as environmental factors that don't come across as clearly in EJ Screen, and also that in rural communities, because with the population being so dispersed, we've had someone who said, they tried to draw an area on EJ Screen and get a report about what they see as their community of focus, and EJ Screen said it was too big, it was too many square miles, and they couldn't get a report. So there are definitely still some challenges with the data, and so we hope that folks will use the narrative to be able to speak to those issues if their map isn't able to effectively convey it.
Yeah, that makes me think, could you maybe just talk about what would make a compelling, what are some qualities of compelling narrative within their application, within, some of the key things you might highly value or look for within an application narrative?
So we definitely go back to those three questions of, being able to talk about the environmental justice issue. So how are you seeing this issue impact your community? And you're certainly welcome to bring other data into that conversation, even if it's not just EJ Screen data, but something that is helping you to understand the issue and how you see that community of focus benefiting. So a couple of the examples that have come up, like if you are addressing a particular demographic group within your community that is spread out across an urban area, where the map says one thing about the level of disadvantage in that community, but it doesn't speak to a particular population within the community, you can use your narrative to describe, this is our community of focus, this is how they're connected to the environmental justice issue, and this is how we are engaging with that particular group. Or if there is a very small targeted area that you're speaking to where you feel like EJ Screen isn't giving you the amount of refinement that you want. What do you know about this community? What are other data sources telling you? And how are you engaging that community in the project? Those are the things that our evaluators will be looking for as they consider the project.
That's clear, thanks. Any other questions? We have a few more minutes.
And I'll also just add, environmental justice is big. And we've heard in our conversations with community members projects that had never occurred to us as we thought about what could get proposed. It's like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense in the context of your community. So our evaluation team is coming into this with an open mind and really looking for our applicants to make the case about the environmental justice issue in the community, and recognizing that there is a local lens that comes with that. So we welcome everyone to take that broad interpretation as well, in terms of how you see environmental issues impacting the health of your communities, and what kinds of projects can be beneficial.
Anything else, or any other questions from the audience? Easy question, Megan. When is the due date?
December 12th.
Okay.
11:59 p.m. Mountain Time.
Got about a month. Okay. Just to reiterate,
And you can.
Please come to MapTech, and we are happy to help. I am now going to put our website, our email address in the chat. So very much, please reach out and we can help with your application.
And you can start the application and save it and come back to it. That is an option.
Oh, there was a question there too. There's a PDF version too, so you can look at the PDF and look through the questions before actually going into the portal. Any other key pieces from your all team? Okay. Well,
Thanks
we
so much
will.
for having us, Ben.
We have this recorded, and it will be up on our YouTube page, and we'll share that out afterwards. Thank you so much to the MAP EJ Grants Hub team, all of you. Very much appreciate it, and all very helpful information. Please reach out to both myself, to the MAP EJ Grants team, and we look forward to working with you and then seeing your applications.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending.